It was just after 7 a.m. when Evelyn's phone buzzed against the kitchen counter. The smell of coffee filled the air, warm and comforting, the way her mornings always began. She reached for the phone, expecting one of her usual good morning messages from her son, Ryan. Instead, the words that appeared on the screen made her chest tighten. "Mom, we had to cancel the family vacation. Finances are tight right now. We'll make it up to you soon." She read it twice, maybe 3 times, her thumb hovering above the screen as if another message would follow. An explanation, a reassurance, something. But nothing came. Just those polite, clipped sentences that left her heart hollow. She sighed, whispering to the empty kitchen, "It's okay, sweetheart. I understand." It wasn't the first time. Over the last few years, tight finances had become the family anthem. Every time, she covered an expense, lent a little more, helped them get through rough patches. But this time, she told herself, maybe things really were difficult. Maybe Ryan just needed a break. She poured her coffee, sat by the window, and tried to let it go. Yet something about the message gnawed at her. The abruptness, the finality. Ryan loved family trips. They had planned this one for months. She had even paid the deposit for her cabin, excited to see her grandkids laugh on the deck. 3 weeks passed. Life moved on, quiet and predictable. Then one lazy Sunday, while scrolling through her tablet, Evelyn opened social media, something she rarely did. A photo glowed on the screen, posted by her daughter-in-law, Monica. Sunlight, ocean, smiles. And Ryan, her son, wearing a white linen shirt, tanned and carefree, holding a cocktail with a little umbrella. Monica was beside him in a coral dress, sparkling like the sea. Their children, Emma and Jack, grinning between Monica's parents. The caption read, "Unforgettable family vacation." Evelyn's breath caught. For a long moment, she couldn't move. Her hand trembled, her heart beat loud in her ears. There it was, the cruise that was cancelled. Every face she loved, every person she'd sacrificed for, laughing under a foreign sun. Everyone but her. Her coffee went cold. The word unforgettable burned into her mind, a knife twisting quietly in her chest. And in that still kitchen, something inside her cracked. After the cruise photos, Evelyn couldn't stop her mind from wandering backward, into the quiet years that had led to this moment. 8 years had passed since her husband, Harold, took his last breath in their living room chair, a gentle man who left her a paid-off house, a modest pension, and a heart that didn't know what to do with its emptiness. Ryan had stepped into that emptiness so easily. He was her only child, her reason to wake up every morning. And when he came to her with that first request, "Mom, we just need a little help this month," she said yes before he even finished the sentence. It started small, $1,000 for a car repair, $2,000 for a leaky roof, another $5,000 for a temporary business setback. Each plea was wrapped in tenderness, each favor softened by affection. "You're our rock, Mom," Ryan would say, his voice warm and reassuring. "We couldn't do this without you." And she believed him, because believing him made her feel needed, and after Harold's death, needed was the only thing she wanted to be. But the small loans grew teeth. Before long, she was covering her granddaughter's braces, her grandson's private school tuition, and Monica's new kitchen remodel after a burst pipe. She transferred money for every crisis, every holiday, every unforeseen situation. When she added it up years later, it was more than $70,000. At the time, she told herself it was love. This was what mothers did, after all. They gave, they sacrificed, they made sure their children never struggled the way they once had. But now, sitting alone in the quiet hum of her house, she saw it differently. It hadn't been love, it had been dependence disguised as devotion, manipulation sugar-coated with family duty. Ryan never asked for money for himself, not directly. He was clever like that. It was always for the kids, for the future, for stability. And every time she tried to say no, his voice would tighten, his words twist gently like a hook. "Mom, you've always been the strong one. You'd want your grandkids to have opportunities, wouldn't you?" And so she gave again and again, until the giving became routine, not a gift of love, but a reflex of fear. Fear that if she stopped, they'd stop calling. Fear that without their needs, she'd have no purpose left at all. In the days after the discovery, Evelyn found herself replaying memories like scenes from a film she had once loved but now saw differently. Every conversation, every visit, every request suddenly carried a new weight, a hidden meaning she had never wanted to face. Ryan's words echoed in her mind. We need. Never asterisk, I need. Asterisk. It struck her how those two letters, that small, simple pronoun, had protected him from ever sounding selfish. We made it sound noble, collective, urgent. It made her open her wallet faster, because how could she refuse something that sounded like family? She remembered Monica's voice, smooth and polite, always edged with something sharper. Oh, Evelyn, you wouldn't enjoy those events. They're too formal for you. The words had been sweetly delivered, but they carried a quiet cruelty, a reminder of where she didn't belong. Evelyn had smiled, pretending not to feel the sting, even as it grew heavier every time. The memories piled up like unopened bills. Her birthday dinners that Ryan forgot to plan because they were too busy. Holidays where her invitation came at the last minute, as if she were an afterthought. And always that chair, the one at the end of their long dining table, empty when she wasn't paying for the meal. Once, during a family barbecue, she had offered to help with groceries. Monica had laughed lightly. Oh, Mom, you've done enough. Just bring your card, we'll handle the rest. Everyone laughed. Evelyn had laughed, too, because what else could she do? But now she saw that moment for what it was, a joke at her expense, a truth disguised as humor. She began to notice how conditional their love had always been. When the money flowed, the calls came often, cheerful check-ins, updates about the kids, shared photos. When she hinted that things were tight or hesitated to send more, the silence grew long and cold. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table staring at the same empty chair she'd eaten beside for years. For the first time, it didn't symbolize loss. It symbolized truth. She realized she had been buying her place in their lives one transaction at a time. And with that thought, a quiet voice whispered inside her, asterisk, this isn't love. This is obligation dressed as affection. Asterisk. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Dora knocked on Evelyn's door. The sun was spilling over the garden fence, catching dust motes that floated lazily in the air. Dora lived 2 houses down, a widow like Evelyn, though somehow she carried her solitude differently. Steady, unbent, as if she had made peace with being alone. She held 2 mugs of coffee and a knowing look. Mind if I come in? She asked, already stepping over the threshold like a friend who didn't need permission. Evelyn nodded, grateful for company she hadn't realized she was craving. They sat in the living room, the one where the silence had grown too thick since the cruise photos. For a while, Dora said nothing. She simply waited, letting the quiet do the work. And then, with a trembling voice, Evelyn began to speak, first in fragments, then in floods. She told her everything, the loans that were never repaid, the excuses, the careful manipulations disguised as love. How she had convinced herself that being generous meant being good, that motherhood meant endless sacrifice. Dora listened, her expression calm but her eyes sharp with understanding. When Evelyn finally stopped, Dora set her mug down with a soft clink. Evelyn, she said quietly, you're not a mother anymore. You're a bank. And banks charge interest. The words struck like a slap, not cruel, but necessary. Evelyn blinked, stunned into silence. A bank, she repeated, almost to herself. The truth of it landed with a weight she couldn't ignore. That night, long after Dora left, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open. She began scrolling through years of bank statements, transfers labeled help, loan, emergency. She wrote each one down, her handwriting tight and angry. 10,000, 8,000, 3,000, tuition, car repairs, remodels, braces. The numbers climbed, line by line, until they reached a figure that made her breath catch. $70,000. She stared at the total glowing on the screen, her reflection faintly visible in the dark glass. It wasn't just money, it was time, trust, pieces of her heart turned into transactions. A lifetime of love measured in deposits. Rage and shame mixed in her chest like acid, but beneath them, something else began to stir, something cold, clean, and powerful. Clarity. For the first time, Evelyn saw her life not through a mother's eyes, but through her own. Evelyn hadn't meant to open social media that afternoon. She had been halfway through folding laundry when her phone buzzed with a notification. For weeks she had been trying to push the unease away, telling herself that Ryan's message about the canceled trip was genuine, that maybe he'd been embarrassed to admit their financial trouble. But curiosity, that small cruel voice that never slept, finally got the better of her. She opened the app, and there it was. A photo of Monica standing on the deck of a massive ship, turquoise sea stretching endlessly behind her. She wore a coral dress that glowed in the sunlight, her sunglasses reflecting an impossible blue sky. The caption read, "Unforgettable family time." Evelyn froze. Her thumb hovered above the screen. Slowly, she swiped to the next photo. Ryan was there, smiling easily, a drink in his hand topped with a tiny umbrella. The children, Emma and Jack, were dressed in crisp white resort clothes, laughing between Monica's parents, everyone shining with the warmth of luxury and belonging. Everyone but her. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. She zoomed in on Ryan's face, on the champagne glasses clinking, on the words, "family vacation." The lie burned brighter than the sun behind them. They hadn't cancelled the trip. They had cancelled her. The air left her lungs in a sharp gasp. She set the phone down on the table, but the images stayed behind her eyelids. Ryan's voice from weeks ago echoed mockingly. Asterisk, "Finances are tight, Mom. We'll make it up to you soon." Asterisk, and she had believed him, like always, because that's what mothers do. Evelyn stared at her reflection in the dark screen. The faint image staring back at her looked unfamiliar, pale, hollow, ghost-like. Not a mother, not family, not the dependable rock they praised when they needed her. Just a woman who had been erased from her own story. Minutes passed. Then hours. The betrayal settled in her bones, heavy and cold. She didn't cry, not yet. She simply sat there, her mind sharp and still, watching the last thread of denial snap. That night, a decision began to take shape, quiet but unshakable. The next time they asked for anything, the answer would not be yes. It would be freedom. 3 weeks passed after the cruise discovery. The shock had cooled into something sharper. Not grief, not even rage, but a steady, controlled clarity. Evelyn didn't call Ryan. She didn't send messages or confront him. She waited. Because she knew, sooner or later, he would need something again. He always did. That morning, as sunlight crept through her curtains, her phone buzzed. The notification preview was almost laughably familiar. "Mom, urgent. Need $6,000 for a card issue. Please. We'll pay back next month." Evelyn stared at the message, the words swimming before her eyes, a repetition of years gone by. Same urgency. Same script. But this time, the spell was broken. Her hand didn't shake. Her heart didn't race. Instead, she felt a stillness, like the quiet that comes just before dawn. She typed slowly, deliberately, tasting every letter as she wrote. "Ask your wife's family." 4 words. No explanation. No emotion. No apology. Just truth. Then she pressed send. A minute later, the screen lit up, Ryan calling. She watched the phone vibrate on the table and did nothing. 1 missed call. Then another. 17 calls in 3 hours. Her silence was louder than any argument she could have made. When Monica's message arrived, it was long and full of punctuation, guilt disguised as concern. Asterisk, "Evelyn, this isn't you. Marcus is worried sick. We're family. Can't we just talk?" Asterisk, Evelyn didn't even finish reading. She deleted it with a flick of her thumb, her pulse steady. That afternoon, she put on her navy coat, grabbed her purse, and walked to the bank. The air felt lighter with each step. At the counter, the young teller recognized her from years of transfers. "What can I do for you today, Mrs. Cole?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "I'd like to close my joint account with my son. Cancel the secondary cards and automatic transfers." The teller hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I've never been surer," Evelyn replied. When the pen touched paper, it made a crisp scratching sound. Simple, final. With that signature, she severed the invisible leash that had bound her for years. As she left the bank, the wind brushed her face like a quiet applause. For the first time in a decade, Evelyn felt something she had forgotten how to feel: weightless. The first few days after closing the accounts were the hardest. The silence in Evelyn's house was thick, almost physical, a constant reminder of everything she had once mistaken for love. No messages. No calls. No "Mom, can you help us out?" The absence was jarring, like stepping into a room after a thunderstorm, the air still humming but the storm finally gone. At first, she didn't know what to do with the quiet. She found herself glancing at her phone out of habit, half expecting another crisis to fix, another plea to answer. But each time the screen stayed dark, she began to breathe a little easier. Silence, she realized, wasn't punishment. It was recovery. She started small. She cooked her favorite meal, roasted chicken with rosemary and lemon, and for the first time in years, she used her best plates. She set the table for one, lit a single candle, and ate slowly, savoring each bite. The food tasted different somehow, lighter, as if it no longer had to fill the emptiness left by guilt. The next morning, her steady, unfiltered neighbor showed up with a basket of muffins and a knowing smile. "You look taller," she said, half joking. "Freedom will do that to a woman." Evelyn laughed, the sound rusty at first, but real. That became her anchor, dropping by for tea, inviting her on walks, reminding her that the world outside her walls hadn't disappeared. Evelyn began to fill her days with things she used to love, but had forgotten she was allowed to enjoy. She signed up for a local art class at the community center, where she learned to mix paints and lose herself in color. She reread her favorite books, watched old movies without distraction, and rediscovered the quiet joy of being alone without being lonely. Sometimes, late at night, she'd sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the streetlights flicker across the road. That same silence that had once felt like abandonment now felt like freedom, wide, calm, and alive. She smiled softly and whispered to herself, as if sealing a truth she finally believed. Silence isn't loneliness, it's space for myself. And for the first time in years, Evelyn felt perfectly at home in her own company. Spring came quietly that year, soft and forgiving. Evelyn's house was filled with sunlight again, the kind that warmed her skin instead of highlighting the dust. One morning, as she sat sipping her coffee and flipping through the newspaper, her eyes caught an ad printed in bright gold letters. Discover Italy, 10 days, $5,000. Travel solo, find yourself again. Her heart gave a strange little flutter. $5,000. Once, that amount would have been sent away with a trembling hand and a note that said, "Don't worry, dear, pay me back whenever you can." But now, the money was hers, truly hers. Still, she hesitated. She hadn't traveled alone in decades. What if she got lost? What if it felt empty without family? But then another thought rose quietly, steady and sure. What if it doesn't? That afternoon, Evelyn booked the trip. No second opinions. No permissions. Just a single, exhilarating click. 10 weeks later, she stepped off a plane in Rome, her heart pounding like it hadn't since her youth. The air smelled of espresso, old stone, and adventure. She wandered cobbled streets, tossing coins into fountains, smiling at strangers. She ate gelato for lunch, drank wine at sunset, and filled her camera with moments that didn't need anyone else in them. In Venice, she bought herself a mustard-yellow dress from a little boutique near the water. The fabric shimmered in the light. Bold, unashamed, alive. When she wore it, she felt like a new version of herself. Not someone's mother, not a caregiver, not a wallet, just Evelyn. On her last night, she met another woman around her age sitting alone at a cafe by the canal. They talked easily, like old friends who had simply forgotten to meet sooner. The woman told her she, too, had spent years giving more than she received. When Evelyn mentioned her son and the pain of letting go, the woman smiled and said, "Forgiveness is optional, but self-respect is sacred." Evelyn held onto those words as the bells of Venice echoed through the night. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small or left behind. She felt vast, as if the whole world had opened its arms and whispered, "Welcome back." Autumn found Evelyn back home, her skin a little tanned from Italy's sun and her spirit softer, steadier. The house no longer felt like an empty echo chamber. It felt lived in, peaceful, like a space that finally belonged to her. She painted, cooked new recipes, and sent postcards to the few friends who had stayed through her quiet transformation. Ryan had not called since that last message, and though part of her once longed for his voice, that ache had faded into calm acceptance. Then, one morning, she found a small padded envelope in her mailbox. The handwriting stopped her heart. It was Ryan's. For a long minute she just stood there, the package trembling in her hands, her breath caught between dread and curiosity. Finally, she carried it inside and opened it with careful fingers. Inside were old photographs, her holding baby Ryan in the backyard, his first bike ride, their family Christmases before life got complicated. Beneath the photos lay a folded piece of paper and a check. The check was written $4,500, the memo line marked first payment. Her fingers hesitated as she unfolded the letter. "Mom, you were right. I used you. I told myself it was for the family, but it was really for me, for my comfort, my pride. I made you carry the weight I should have carried myself. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to make things right. I'm paying you back, not for forgiveness, but for redemption. I'm sorry for what I became. Ryan." Evelyn stared at the words until they blurred. Tears filled her eyes, soft and slow, not from pain this time but from release. She pressed the letter to her chest and whispered, "Thank you. Not for the money, not even for the apology, but for the acknowledgement, the truth she had needed more than repayment." She placed the check in her desk drawer, closed it gently, and left it there. Some debts, she thought, weren't meant to be cashed, only recognized. That evening, as she watched the sun dip below the horizon, she felt a calm she hadn't known in years. She had forgiven him, quietly, completely, but without surrendering her peace. For the first time, forgiveness didn't mean losing herself. It meant she'd finally found her balance between love and freedom. 2 years passed, and life unfolded in a way Evelyn could never have imagined back when her days revolved around her phone and someone else's needs. The quiet that once felt like punishment had become a blessing, a soft rhythm she moved through with grace. Her mornings began with sunlight spilling across the dining table, her paintbrush waiting beside her coffee cup. The walls that once echoed with silence now held her artwork. Seascapes, flowers, and bursts of color that seemed to mirror her rediscovered joy. Ryan still sent checks every few months. Smaller amounts at first, then more regular. She accepted them not as repayment, but as reminders that accountability was possible, even after years of blindness. The money wasn't what healed her. It was knowing her son had finally looked in the mirror and seen the truth. Forgiveness had grown naturally, not forced or demanded, like a tree that finally bore fruit after a long, harsh winter. Her grandson, Jamal, had started visiting on his own. No excuses, no pretense. Just genuine warmth and curiosity. He would sit at her table, helping her mix paints, listening to her stories about Italy and her younger years. "Grandma," he once said, eyes bright with admiration, "you've got more adventures than anyone I know." Evelyn laughed softly. "That's because I finally stopped waiting for someone to give me permission to live." Dora was still her closest companion, the kind of friend who understood the difference between solitude and loneliness. They traveled together sometimes, short weekend trips by the sea. They ate too much dessert, shared secrets, and laughed until tears came. One evening, while painting the sky from her back porch, Evelyn caught herself reflecting on the road she had walked. The pain, the betrayal, the silence, every bit of it had carried her to this moment. She dipped her brush into gold and whispered to herself, "I didn't lose $70,000. I bought my freedom, my dignity, my life." As the sun sank below the horizon, she smiled at her canvas, a radiant sunset of gold and crimson. The world outside was quiet, but inside her heart, there was music again. Real love, she thought, never empties your wallet or your soul. And it's never too late to choose yourself.